Have you ever had your plant look off and suspect that it may be nutrients? Plant nutrition provides the needed nutrients for plants to grow in an unnatural environment. Plant nutrition increases the plant's ability to compete favorably in its environment and resist pests that may cause damage. Plants need 17 elements for growth. From water and air come oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. The rest come from soil. Fertilizers are applied to optimize nutrients in soil. I'm Dr. DeBusk, and this video will discuss plant nutrients and the soil. When it comes to plant nutrition, macronutrients are needed in relatively large quantities and include nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These three are typically listed on the front of a fertilizer tag. The secondary nutrients are needed in lesser amounts, including calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Micronutrients are needed only in small amounts, but they are just as important for healthy plant growth. These include boron, chlorine, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, zinc, and nickel. If a particular element is in short supply, such as nitrogen, this limits the growth of the plant. For example, if a certain plant is getting enough of all the necessary elements except potassium, the plant cannot reach its full growth potential until the level of potassium is brought up to normal. This is commonly seen in palms in Florida. Nitrogen is needed in the largest quantity, making it the most important element. It is needed for protein production in the plant. It promotes rapid shoot growth and gives lawns that healthy green color. Since it easily moves through the soil, making it subject to leaching, it is most often in short supply. If nitrogen is deficient, the growth stops and the leaves become pale and yellowish. Although you can have too much of a good thing, which can cause thatch and turf and insect and disease problems, as well as making it more susceptible to heat, drought, and cold. Phosphorus is important in that it stimulates root growth and promotes flowering. Phosphorus is needed in all the DNA and RNA in plants, making it crucial to the plant. Smaller quantities are needed since it tends to stay in the soil. It is affected greatly by pH, preventing release. Florida is known to mine phosphorus, so most turf fertilizers have low or no percentage of phosphorus. Many counties require that the fertilizer have no added phosphorus. Deficiencies in ornamental plants show up as stunted growth and purpling of the stems and leaves. Similar to nitrogen, potassium is easily leached, especially in sandy soils, but not to the same extent as nitrogen. Potassium is needed to help open and close stomata, regulating water. Because of that, it helps strengthen lawns and acts as a defense to traffic, disease, cold, and drought. It is not needed in as high amounts as nitrogen, often half as much. In the fall, turf fertilizers should contain a much smaller amount of nitrogen and higher amounts of potassium to help protect them from more harsh winter conditions. Deficiency symptoms on ornamental plants often show up as necrotic areas on the leaf margins of the older leaves. Often those leaves die prematurely. If you suspect a deficiency, you can send in a soil or tissue sample for analysis. The type and distribution of symptoms can also be helpful, although many symptoms can look like other abiotic and biotic issues. If you are trying to determine if it is a nutritional issue, look at the distribution of symptoms. Nutrition problems will show up on the majority of leaves, either the older or younger leaves, depending on the nutrient. If it is spotty or localized to one area, then it is likely not a nutritional issue. Once you determine the distribution, look at the symptoms. Chlorosis is yellowing while necrosis is dead tissue. Look how those symptoms are on the leaves and possibly narrow down a nutrient deficiency. Look at these symptoms of deficiency on the roses and azaleas. By using the key, you identify the deficiency as magnesium for the roses and iron for the azaleas. Although for the azaleas, you would also want to test the pH, since a high pH can cause iron to be unavailable. You can see the diversity of deficiency symptoms here on the palms. Keep in mind that certain plants may have a different look when it comes to deficiency symptoms, so it is important to be familiar with what the standard symptoms look like in that plant. There are several outcomes to nutrients. What we hope to happen is that the nutrients are either taken up by plants and other soil organisms, or that they are stored in the soil on clay particles and organic matter and released later on. Unfortunately, nutrients may run off in water or with soil erosion. This is why many counties have issued ordinances preventing applications of fertilizers, especially for homeowners, during the wet summer months, when it rains almost daily. Those heavy rains or even over-irrigation can also cause nutrients, especially nitrogen, to leach into the groundwater when the water carries them past the plant roots. This was a major problem for golf courses in the past, since the roots can be so short and golf course superintendents are trying to keep their greens green and pristine. thereby over-applying fertilizer. Nitrogen fertilizer can also volatilize, where the fertilizer is converted to a gas and lost to the air. This is common in hot conditions with fertilizer that doesn't have at least 1/4 inch of irrigation to water in any solid materials. To understand how plants use fertilizers, it is necessary to understand soil properties. Soil plays a pivotal role in plant growth. Soil and its characteristics are easily overlooked. First and foremost, it provides mechanical support, but it also provides warmth, air, water, and nutrients. If any of these are not in balance, then plants can suffer. Ideally, water and air each make up 25% of the total soil. Things like compaction can reduce the amount of air. Soil also includes organic matter and a mix of sand, silt, and clay. There are benefits and detriments for each of these. Organic material is really beneficial to the soil since it holds nutrients and water and provides beneficial microorganisms. Too much organic matter can hold too much water. Sand provides good drainage, but on the flip side is that it doesn't hold nutrients or water. Silt holds water well, but large amounts are subject to erosion. Clay really holds water and provides sites on the particle to hold nutrients, although it clumps and can promote compaction. For the most part, Florida has mostly sandy soil with low organic material. If you are going to add amendments to the soil, it is best to add organic matter rather than clay, since clay will just coat the sand particles and not provide the properties you want. An important chemical property of soil is pH. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral. Anything below 7 is various levels of acidic, with soil becoming more acidic the lower the number is. Anything above 7 is various levels of basic or alkaline, with it being more alkaline the higher the numbers are. Ideal soil pH is slightly acidic, being between 6.5 and 7.0. Each plant has its own preference. Plants such as azaleas, gardenias, and hydrangeas prefer more acidic soils ranging from 4.5 to 5.5. Soil pH influences nutrient availability, and managing soil pH is equally important as establishing a sound fertilization program. In this graphic, the white lines show the availability of that specific nutrient. Between 6.5 and 7, you can see that all of the nutrients have sufficient availability. Although the previous slide mentioned that some plants like a lower or higher pH, this is because they need a higher micronutrient availability. For instance, azaleas need more iron to thrive, so in more acidic conditions, iron is more available. If we go to a higher pH, iron is much less available because it gets tied up in the soil and is unable to be released. Therefore, there could be sufficient iron, but it is not available for the plant. That is why the pH must be checked in addition to the nutrients in a soil test, because the solution would be to acidify the soil to release the iron rather than to add more iron. I see this problem with turf grass as well. The turf will be really thin and you may suspect disease or insects when it's actually a pH problem. What can cause your pH to be too low? Rain naturally decreases the pH by leaching out pH regulating minerals like calcium. If you have a lot of pines or oaks on the property, the pH may be low. Man-made ways that causes a decrease in pH may be stripping the top layer of the soil, using ammoniac fertilizer, especially fertilizers containing ammonium sulfate, and occasionally adding organic material. You can increase the pH by adding calcium or lime. Make sure to get a soil test to determine how much you need. What can cause your pH to be too high? Some soils, especially in South Florida, naturally contain excessive amounts of calcium carbonate, limestone, or ground seashells. Irrigating with water that is high in sodium bicarbonate, salts, or liming too often can increase the pH to too high a level. To decrease the pH, elemental sulfur, aluminum sulfate for hydrangeas, or ammonium sulfate can be added. In ornamental beds, the addition of peat moss or mulching with pine needles or composted pine bark can help. Before you plant landscape plants or turf, or every 1 or 2 years, you should take a soil sample to see where your nutrient levels are and the pH of the soil. There are university and private labs that process soil samples and provide interpretations of the results. In order to do a soil sample, take 15 samples from average areas, combine and mix them, and send in 1 cup of soil per area. Make a record or sketch the areas that you sampled. You want to have a sample for different areas on the landscape. For example, when I lived in Virginia, I took samples from the backyard where there were a lot of pine trees and the turf was thin, the front yard where there were no pine trees and the turf was lush, in my large ornamental bed. Make sure you label them appropriately. Chemical properties such as soil pH, lime requirement, extractable levels of phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and selected micronutrients such as manganese, copper, and zinc can be determined through soil testing. Florida soils are not analyzed for nitrogen because it is highly mobile on sandy soils. Since reliable correlations between turfgrass growth and soil test nitrogen have not been developed, turfgrass nitrogen fertilization is based on the requirements of the individual turfgrass being grown. A soil test is beneficial since it will tell you if you need to add fertilizer, how much or what ratio of fertilizers you need to add, the soil pH and whether it is too basic, acidic, or just right, and if you need to add lime and how much. Different labs will show the results in different ways. Most often it is bars indicating the general level, but it can also be ratings such as low, medium, or sufficient, high, and very high. Often the numbers are only important to the lab and calibrated to the test used. Look at the test shown on the slide. I have a few places that are circled that are important to note. The test indicates that the phosphorus is very high, although this is often the case in Florida, and the potassium is low. Therefore, the fertilizer recommendations show a ratio with low or no phosphorus, the middle number, and higher potassium, the last number. The soil pH is also important to note. Since it is 7.0, which is good, there is no lime recommendation. Take a look at this soil test. This was my soil test done at the University of Florida on my St. Augustine grass lawn out front of my house when I lived in Gainesville. What is significant in this one? In this soil test, the phosphorus is again very high and both the potassium and magnesium is low. The fertilizer recommendation indicates a higher potassium amount, although these amounts would be put over the entire growing season, not at one time. Since the soil pH is 4.5 and the target is 6.5, there is a lime recommendation. Since the magnesium was low, I would want to use dolomite as the lime material to add magnesium. This is a large amount of lime, so it has to be broken down in intervals of about 30 to 60 pounds per 1,000 square feet, or you would be walking on a half foot of lime. In conclusion, I hope you learned about some of the basics about plant nutrition, the effects of soil pH, and soil testing. This video only touched on what there is to know on this topic.